The Art of Magic: The Gathering is a tool for understanding the way of the Planeswalker and the design of the game. So we can use it as a guide to win against superior Planeswalkers or meta decks. And the only way to defeat them is capitalizing on opportunities. But how do we find them? Well, in order to do that, we have to learn how to process information. Because if you look back, you can always find the hidden clues that was signaling an opening. And that is our first way of finding an opportunity: our attention to detail. During a Magic: The Gathering match, we have access to information about the battlefield and graveyards. Sometimes we even get to have a peek at our opponent's hand, which we can use that information to our advantage. But let's assume you don't know what's in your opponent's hand, and instead you see 4 copies of Go for the Throat in their graveyard. That means if you play your Sheoldred, they most likely wouldn't have any way to deal with it. This is a simple example of using your attention to detail to defeat a Planeswalker. But sometimes you have to act before your opponent reveals that much information. Then you can rely on your pattern recognition skill. Pattern recognition is your ability to predict your opponent's play patterns and use them to your advantage. If your opponent plays an Up to Beanstalk, you can expect them to play other spells that cost 5 or more mana to trigger it. That means if you play your Fairy Mastermind during your opponent's turn while they trigger their Up to Beanstalk, you can get a free card out of it, which would negate the card advantage they just gained. Because Fairy Mastermind allows you to draw a card whenever your opponents draw their second card. But that isn't the only way to predict an outcome. Sometimes you can get the same information from a past experience or you guessing your opponent's deck. If you are familiar with red aggro decks, you know they love to play a card called Monstrous Rage, which gives a creature +2 power and a monster roll which gives them +1/+1 and trample. Now let's imagine a scenario where your opponent attacks with their Monastery Swiftspear with an untapped mountain. If you play your Elspeth Smite to kill it, they can play their Monstrous Rage in response to trigger their Monastery Swiftspear's prowess ability. In that scenario, Monastery Swiftspear becomes a 5/4, which not only you cannot kill it with your Elspeth Smite, but you will also be going to taking a massive damage. Now if you hold on to your Elspeth Smite and accept taking that 1 damage, your opponent has to make a decision. They either have to accept it and slow down, which is terrible news for a deck that wanna finish the game as fast as possible, or play their Monstrous Rage before you, which you can respond and kill it with your Elspeth Smite before the trigger happens. This is you predicting an outcome based on your internal knowledge. That internal knowledge can also help you avoid mistakes if you are aware of your deck. If you play a Jeskai Convoke deck, you should be aware of convoking for 4 with your Knight Errant of Eos is meaningless. Knight Errant of Eos allows you to look at the top 6 cards of your deck and put 2 creatures that has mana cost equal to or lower than the number of creatures you convoked into your hand. Jeskai Convoke decks traditionally doesn't have any 4 mana creatures in them. That means if you have 4 creatures that can attack, tapping all of them to convoke is a waste of resource. Because you can get all the creatures by convoking with 3 creatures already. And since Jeskai Convoke is an aggro deck, even dealing a single damage could be game-changing. But what if you are not playing an aggro deck? What should you value then? Well, to answer that question, we should focus on what your deck desires. Every deck is built around certain payoff cards. If you build your deck around Caretaker's Talent, keeping a good mess of tokens until you reach its 3rd level is better than using your tokens as blockers, because its level 3 ability will give all your creature tokens +2/+2. Or maybe you build your deck around Tolarian Terror, which means you have to build your own deck and put your own instant and sorcery cards into your graveyard by using cards like Cash Grab, so you can cast your Tolarian Terror, a 5/5 creature with worth 2 for a single blue mana. This is how you use your understanding of your deck's value to your advantage. Now with the same logic, you can also use your opponent's deck's desires to your advantage. For example, if your opponent is playing an Golgari Innkeeper deck, they wanna combine it with cards like Deep Cavern Bat, Mosswood Knight, or Vraska Betrayal's Sting. Since Innkeeper's Talent will add more counters to them and make them game-breaking. Now, if you start killing those cards, Innkeeper's Talent is useless. If you are the faster deck on the other hand, you wanna kill their Llanowar Elves to slow them down enough to finish them. This is you understanding what your opponent's deck wants and turn it into an advantage. And since they can't do their broken combos, they are basically weaker than you. This means you get to do your own combos to turn the game around by understanding how the game's mechanics work. For example, if you think your Overlord cards are powerful yet slow and very weak to removal, you can add cards like Zur Eternal Shimmer or Scroll Shift. Zur can turn your enchantments into creatures and give them hexproof. That means you can cheat your Overlord's impending cost and give them hexproof at instant speed for 2 mana. Scroll Shift on the other hand can exile your Overlords in response to a removal to save them. This will also both trigger their Enter the Battlefield ability again and turn them into creatures, which is still cheating. That is how you break the game's rules to generate value. But your opponents can do that as well, unless you logically deal with that. Trying to stop cards like Unstoppable Slasher, Enduring Curiosity, or Heartfire Hero with removals like Go for the Throat, Get Lost, or Burst Lightning is inefficient. Because Unstoppable Slasher will come back and make you lose card advantage, Enduring Curiosity turns into an enchantment and still provide value, and Heartfire Hero will still deal you damage equal to its power, which is what it has to do anyway. Now if you try to remove them with cards like Anoint with Affliction, Lay Down Arms, or Torch the Tower, you can get rid of them for good because you would be exiling them instead of killing them. This is how you use logical loopholes to deal with troublesome cards. This will give us 8 skills to find opportunities, so we can defeat meta decks or superior planeswalkers. These skills are Perception, Pattern Recognition, Prediction, Awareness, Evaluation, Empathy, Understanding, and Logic respectively. And as I explain all these skills to you, some might have felt familiar. Because as humans we have different levels of proficiency on each of these skills. Based on your proficiency on each of these skills, you can find different tiers of opportunities. These are experienced opportunities, expected opportunities, exceptional opportunities, and exponential opportunities. First tier of opportunities are experienced opportunities. These are the opportunities you can find because you already knew about them. If you ever got hit by an Innkeeper's Talent and Vraska Betrayal Sting combo, you would be ready for it next time. This means you can improve yourself on every skill by just learning about the game. Just like watching my videos. Second tier of opportunities are expected opportunities. These are the opportunities you can find by getting familiar with general heuristics of the game. If you are playing against an aggro deck, regardless of the type, once you slow them down, they will lose power, because they are generally not built for the long game. As you play more games, you will gain more proficiency in the skill you use, which will naturally allow you to find these opportunities. Third tier of opportunities, on the other hand, will require you to start combining different information to understand situational problems. That's why we are calling these opportunities exceptional opportunities. They are the opportunities that are born from unique interactions in certain matchups. If your opponent played an up to beanstalk, you can create pressure by just playing a Sheoldred and protecting it. Since your opponent will be drawing a bunch of cards, Sheoldred will deal them 2 damage for each card they draw. In order to find these opportunities, you should start studying other decks as well. That's how you learn to play each of those matchups. But on professional level, they even go a step further. Fourth and pro tier opportunities requires mastery of a skill, which allows you to not only understand the current value of a play, but also help you judge how would that play will result in 10 turns down the line. Tapping a single blocker and creating 2 1/1 flyers with Fabulum trick at the end of your opponent's turn might doesn't seem like much at first. But if you do it when your opponent is tapped out on mana and while you are having an enduring curiosity, you can put your opponent into a permanent catch-up position for the entire game, because you will be constantly dealing damage and drawing much more cards than them. And as you can see, it's so natural for a new player to miss out on such opportunities. Yet, this is how top level players defeat their opponents and make amazing comebacks. So my advice is, first focus on mastering the skill that you feel more familiar with. Then find skills that complements them by making them more efficient and covering their weaknesses. Finally, start practicing all the skills because there is no skill cap. Now if you understand how to capitalize on opportunities, there is no planeswalker that can stop you. And if you enjoyed this video and want more people to see it, please drop down a like. But if you say this video isn't enough and you want me to make another video for you, I will start a subscription goal. Once I get exactly 1 subscriber, I will be making another video. On that video, I will be talking about how to understand your role in a matchup and execute a strategy step by step. But until then, you can watch this next video where I talk about how to build your own deck.